Yeah, so I'll kick off with the Q&A and see how it goes, and the kind of the answers and the areas we get into, possible rabbit holes. We'll see if we can take questions during the interview or whether we push them back towards the end. I'm going to leave that responsibility with Ryan. Ryan might see some questions coming in via the chat. So we'll be pragmatic and we'll play it by ear. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank Pat on behalf of Dealey Plaza UK. This is certainly one of our most unusual Zoom calls. We've got people in person, 3 people in person at 1026 Beckley, which is really quite odd. And we've got quite a few people that are in remotely, some from the States and some from the UK. So what I would like to do to start with, Pat, is really look at some of the background issues.
Okay.
You and I, obviously, we spent a few hours together last week.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. But I just want to touch on some of the things I did ask you last week for the benefit of the other participants. So I think the first area that I'd like to get into is, what was life like in Oak Cliff in the early 60s, and particularly at 1026 Beckley, with respect to, was your mother and your grandparents strict? Was it a very religious kind of neighborhood? Was there a kind of like a no drinking thing going on? Was there people running around toting guns? Was there a gun culture that you kind of grew up with? Just, what was the general vibe like around here, and also obviously at the rooming house?
Well, in 63, Oak Cliff was just a very typical suburb of Dallas. It was Oak Cliff is the largest suburb of Dallas, and the majority of Oak Cliff at that time was white. But there was a smattering of Blacks and Hispanics. Usually within a culture, people are more comfortable with their own culture. And so you get those divided neighborhoods where Hispanics mostly settle and Blacks mostly settle and all that. But there was a spattering of everybody throughout Oak Cliff. And I was never aware of tension. There was not a high crime rate or anything like that. Happened long years afterwards.
Would that be more in the 70s?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, Oak Cliff has been through a huge years. As a young teenager, it was so safe here in Oak Cliff that my best friend and I would sneak out of our homes at night and we would walk the streets of Oak Cliff almost all night long. And
it's amazing.
Yeah. And we'd walk from one destination to another. We might stop at an all-night diner, have a Coke, talk some more, walk some more. And every once in a while, a police officer would drive by. He'd stop, roll down his windows and say, "You girls are okay?" And we'd go, "Yes, sir, we're fine." And he'd say, "Okay, just, stay out of trouble." And off you'd go. I would never allow anyone to do that now.
No, of course.
But it was that safe.
Yeah. So say in the summer holidays, would you just be out for the whole day on bikes and just, you said to your mum or your grandparents, we're out, we'll come back for tea or supper or something.
Yeah. We had to check in every few hours. but you know, it was fun. My family home was actually only 4 blocks away from this house.
Mhm.
So that made it very convenient when we were out and about, if we were thirsty, hungry, whatever,
Mhm.
we could either go to our house or come to my grandmother's,
Yeah.
you know, and she always had something we could eat.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine.
She was a baker and all of that kind of stuff. So there was always some goodies.
So very much a safe environment.
Very much.
No real tension between races or anything
No,
of that ilk.
not back then.
And what-
Not that I was aware of.
Mhm.
But then I was only 11 years old.
Sure.
And kids really don't care about that kind of
No.
thing. They just want to have friends and play.
Mhm. Oh, that's good. Okay, well, that's given us a bit of context. To your point about coming over to the rooming house, how often would you say you kept? What was typical?
Well, during the school year, my brothers and I were here every single day after school.
Yeah.
It was your typical get the homework done, wait for mom to pick you up to take you home.
Mhm.
And
Because your parents were divorced, were they at that
Yes.
time?
my parents were divorced by
Yeah.
63. Mother was an artist and a photographer. So she had her photography studio, which kept her quite busy.
Mhm.
And but that's why we ended up knowing Mr. Lee,
Mhm.
because I was 11, Hal was 10, and Mike was 6. You just don't leave those age groups alone at home.
Yeah.
There's always the possibility of torture.
Mhm.
And I was the one that would be tortured.
Well,
Even though I was the oldest.
That makes sense as
My
the
brothers
as the
were-
female. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, given the fact you stayed over here quite a lot, where did you sleep?
Well, the rule was, because I was the only girl,
Mhm.
whatever bed was empty in the main house, that's where I slept.
Yes.
And since Mr. Lee went to Irving every single weekend,
Mhm.
I slept in his room.
Which obviously is the room behind that you're sitting.
Yes.
It's amazing, that, isn't it? Really.
I'm sorry, Neil, I don't see them.
I've got something with 3 on it. I don't know what that means.
Oh, that's just the chat. That's
Okay.
just the
All
chat.
right. So.
You're good.
Yeah. So we talked about this last week. How would you describe your grandparents' financial position? Because your granddad had a carpentry business, and they had an apartment and
Mhm.
the rooming house and the cafe down in Young
Yeah.
Street downtown.
Well,
What would you say?
I would not say. I never thought of my grandparents as being wealthy,
Mhm.
but yet, now that I'm an adult, they could have bought whatever they wanted.
Yeah. So they were quite
Right.
discreet, were they, in
Yes.
terms of? But
They-
you told me a wonderful story about the car purchase last
Oh,
week.
yeah.
Could you just give us that anecdote again, please?
My grandmother decided to buy a new car. She went around, picked out the 4 different models that she liked. She picked out the colors that she liked. She called the dealerships and said, "Send your sales manager over here. I'm going to buy a car." So they sent managers. What she didn't tell them was that they were all 4 supposed to arrive at the same time. And so she sat them down at this table, served them coffee and cake or pie. I don't remember which one. And she said, "Look, I don't care which car I end up with. I just want the best deal." So they started haggling.
So she would have had Ford and Chrysler and General Motors
Yes.
dealers. I mean, that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Can you
And
imagine that today?
No.
So 4
Yeah.
salesmen in
yeah,
4
and
cars.
finally, 2 were left. And then she looked at him and she said, okay, again, I don't care which one I get. Who's going to give me the best deal for cash?
Amazing.
And then they started haggling again. And when they finished their haggling, the one car sales manager was left, and she went and got her purse and she started counting out the cash.
I guess, I mean, you know, they had businesses that were quite cash orientated. If you think,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the carpentry business, the
Mhm.
cafe, I would imagine, and obviously the rooming house. as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense that she
So
would
she-
be dealing in cash.
Yeah. She dealt in cash a lot,
Yeah.
but she was very frugal. She didn't buy gifts and things for the grandkids on a regular basis. It had to be a special occasion, your birthday or Christmas or
Right.
whatever, but it was not going to be extravagant.
Mhm. Do you remember going out for trips in the car? Did
Oh, yeah, we'd go and, you know, she loved sing-alongs.
Mhm.
And there was a rumor that lived here that he had loved sing-alongs.
Mhm.
And he would get information about some sing-along that was going to be somewhere in East Texas or around the general area. And she'd pack up a lunch
Mhm.
basket and blankets, and off we'd go. And we'd spread the blanket out, and we would listen to the different gospel groups
Mhm.
singing, and we'd sing along and
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Were your parents religious, do you think? Were they quite religious?
Not really,
Right.
not really. Both my sets of grandparents, they were Southern Baptist.
Right.
My mother raised me basically Catholic until the 4th grade, when we went to public school at that time. Before then, I went to Catholic school.
Right.
And but she started looking for her own way
Mhm.
in the religious community,
Mhm.
and she introduced me to a awful lot of different religions.
Right.
Um,
Was this for you to make up your own mind, or because she was just finding herself?
she was trying to find herself.
Right.
But I will admit, when I found my church,
Mhm.
it was very easy for me to know what I felt was right for me and my family.
So you were able to contrast and compare over.
Because I always found truths
Mhm.
in every religion that we were a part of,
Mhm. Mhm.
but they never answered all of my questions.
Okay. Yeah, understand. And your mother, as a Catholic, was she a Kennedy supporter?
She was a Kennedy supporter. She thought he was the most marvelous man, but at the same time, she was persuaded by his charm and good looks.
I guess there were a lot of women that were
Yes,
persuaded,
they were.
persuaded by his charm and good looks. Yes.
Yes,
If
yeah.
if I could interject here real quick, it piggybacks on a question that came in the chat here, Neil, and I think you were mentioning some of the other people that were rooming here at the time would maybe know about these sing-alongs or something along that line, and that's how you would get information about these. One of the questions that came in was if you could expound on any of the other people that were rooming at the house at the time, maybe any memories that you have or anything that stands out to you about the other folks that were rooming here at the house at the same time that Oswald was.
Well, the only reason why I really remember the sing-along gentleman, his name was Van. He lived here for almost 50 years.
Crikey.
Yeah,
Wow.
in the same room.
That's not what we're led to believe.
No.
We're led to believe it's kind of like a transitory
Well,
experience.
generally, it was transit.
Yeah.
People that had moved into Dallas looking for the right job,
Mhm.
once they found it, you know, in those days, you moved closer to work. You
Mhm.
did not commute. And so the house was more of a transit thing. Now, we did have a few, what I call frequent flyers. They would have an argument with the wife. She'd kick them out.
Mhm.
They'd come here, stay a few weeks to a month or two. They would be forgiven, move back home, and then sometime later, they'd be back because she threw them out again.
That's amazing. Yeah,
You know, but
we don't have those in the UK. Maybe we should. Let me ask you, moving to Lee Harvey Oswald,
Mhm.
in terms of the direct family experiences that you had. You said that your brothers obviously spent much more time playing with them, baseball and football in the yard, and cowboys and Indians and that sort of stuff. How often did you interact with Mr. Lee, as you call him, and what did you actually get up to together?
Well, when you're 11 years old, there's not too many adults that are going to sit down and have deep conversations with an 11-year-old. But he was always kind. He would encourage me in school. I think he recognized that I was struggling with dyslexia, very similar to his struggle.
Yes.
And he would occasionally try to help me with my homework. That was always had to be done on the sly, because my grandmother did not like anyone to help me with my homework except herself. And I didn't like the way she tried to help me with my homework.
Was she strict and
very
not sympathetic? Or
no, she was not.
right.
She and the school system itself, because of my struggling, I think they pretty much considered me.
I think we're hearing her talk, but I don't see the picture. No, it does. You want to see, they have pictures.
So, yeah, she was strict. Personally, I think she liked boys better than girls.
Right.
I always had chores.
Yeah, she was saying last week, plenty of chores. Yeah.
Plenty of chores. My brothers never ever took out the trash. I think that's discrimination.
Yes, yeah, probably was. Yeah.
But one of the great questions that he would ask me every once in a while was, what was the most interesting thing you learned in school today?
That's amazing.
That really is a great question, because it makes the person think about, what did they learn that day? And I wanted to be able to answer him.
Yeah, that's great.
So it did cause me to pay a little closer attention to what was happening in school so that I could answer.
Do you think, given his family background, that he was more likely to be able to forge good relationships, and I don't mean in a sinister way, but with children rather than adults, because the sort of narrative is that he's a introvert, awkward, alone, didn't speak much, but we've got your experience of playing with him playing with your brothers and helping you out and playing with the Paynes children and so forth over in Irving. What do you think?
Well, I most definitely think he related to children much easier than he related to adults. It is because of his background. He did have a horrible childhood. And we honestly do not know how awful it was, because he did spend the majority of his first 5 years in an orphanage. Orphanages are not considered a great place to grow up in today's world. But back then, they didn't do background checks. They didn't have to have any education in child development or anything like that. You didn't know if they were even nice people.
Was the same as the UK, even right up into the 70s and 80s. There
Yeah.
was nothing.
And so, we absolutely, and those are such formative years.
Mm, mm,
We really don't know how horrible that was.
Mm.
And then when he does, his mother takes all he and his brothers back. Most of the experts do agree that she was probably mentally ill herself.
mm,
I believe it was probably severe bipolar.
mhm.
But I've worked with bipolar people. Very difficult to have a relationship with them.
Mm.
And so his childhood never got better.
Mm. Mm.
He learned from a very young age. When mama tells you to do something, you better do it pretty quick because you don't want to get on mama's bad side. So he was automatically groomed to take orders
Yes.
and
Yeah.
not to question,
Yeah. Yeah.
because he goes from a mom situation like that, and then he meets David Ferry and goes into Air Civil Patrol.
Mhm.
Well, that's a military type organization.
Yeah.
Goes into the Marines. All of this is you take orders. So he is very well groomed
Yeah.
into taking orders.
Mm.
But at the same time, I think, especially when he becomes a dad,
Mm.
he wants his baby to have the best memories
Mm.
that he can give her. And that's why he, associated so easily with children.
Mm. Mm.
Because he wanted them to have what he never had.
So how would you describe his overall personality as you saw it from that youngish age?
Well, I don't think he liked adults because of his childhood. He had always been manipulated, taken advantage of, most likely abused.
Mhm.
So I can understand why he would be standoffish
Mhm.
to adults.
Mm.
Now, he was never rude as far as I ever saw.
Mm.
If someone asked him a question, he would answer. It
Mm.
was going to be a short question,
Yeah.
answer, but he was going to answer.
Mm.
But with children, he
Very
was
kind.
just
Yeah.
totally kind, totally open,
Mm.
just wanted to enjoy
Mm. Interesting.
and possibly recapture what he never had.
I mean, you mentioned, I think was it last week, that he play with the children for 2 to 3 hours. I mean,
Yeah. That's not typical.
that really
24-year-old.
surprised me because reading from afar, I got the impression he might go out and play hide and seek or throw a ball around for
Mhm.
10 minutes, but that's a substantial amount of
It
time
is.
that he gave to
He
children.
did. Because when he was playing with my brothers, he would play until my mother got here to pick us up.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of times it was only 30 minutes,
Yeah.
but she was a photographer.
Yes.
And so if she was photographing a wedding that night,
Oh, she worked in evenings sometimes. Yeah.
and so it was going to be 3 hours
Wow.
before she got here to pick us up. Or if she was also an artist, or so if she had a painting that she needed to finish
Mm.
so she could deliver it,
Yes.
that was going to be another 3 hours.
Yeah, and particularly with them being divorced. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
And so he would play with my brothers until my mother got here.
You just never see this or read this. Did he play indoors or only
No,
outside?
they really didn't play indoors.
Right. So it'd be dark then.
Yeah.
It'd be playing out in the street.
The porch light would be on.
Yeah. And you just sit there on the porch.
You sit on the porch and
Yeah.
you run around the front yard.
Right.
Yeah. It was my grandmother was funny.
Mm.
When they would be playing one of the different ball games, she did not like them playing on the side of the house where the driveway was.
Mhm.
That would have been the most safe place for them to play.
Mhm.
But she was more worried about them accidentally breaking a window. So they had to play in the front yard.
Yeah.
It was perfectly fine for the ball to roll out into the street.
That's quite a busy junction, the
Oh,
Zhang
yes,
Beckley intersection.
Yes.
As you start to come down this street slightly, it's a little quieter. How did you remember the traffic? And that
Oh, the
period?
traffic was always busy,
Was it? Okay.
always, because Beckley and Zhang are two of the major streets coming in to Oak Cliff
Yeah.
from downtown
And,
Dallas.
running north-south, of course. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Was there a street light there at that time as well? Or
Oh,
was it-
yes.
Okay, there was a street light there.
Yes.
I mean traffic lights.
Traffic light, I'm
Traffic
sorry.
light.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes.
Well,
So,
but
us
there was both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I should clarify traffic lights, what I meant, yes.
yeah.
Okay.
So he would toss a ball, baseball and football around. Do you remember whether he was left or right-handed? I know that's an odd question to ask, but it might be significant.
I think he was right-handed,
Okay.
but I couldn't swear it.
Okay. Can we just talk about the rooming house?
Sure.
As per our conversation last week, I was surprised at how it was configured for guests.
Yeah.
Would you mind just telling the attendees the various sections you had, the number of bathrooms and so
Okay.
forth, and
Yeah.
how it maxed out in terms of number
Yeah.
of guests?
Well, the house is a longhouse. I guess a lot of people would call it a shotgun house.
Okay.
And so the main section of the house, the first floor, basically, had 7 bedrooms
Mhm,
and 1 bath. Everybody shared.
mhm. This is the bathroom that I've just used, isn't it?
Yes. And so she rented out 5 of the
Mhm.
bathrooms.
Mhm.
I mean, 5 of the bedrooms.
Yes,
The other 2 bedrooms were naturally my grandparents
yes.
and the live-in housekeeper.
And Erling Roberts, were you saying that she lived in that room
Mm-hmm.
just the other side of
The
Oswald?
curtains, uh-huh.
yeah.
Mhm.
And that was that equally thin?
Oh, yes.
So it's almost the mirror image of the Oswald room, is it?
Actually, it's even smaller.
Is it? Okay.
And because there was barely room for a twin-size bed and an armoire.
Mhm.
That was,
So this room here, as you come in the front door, first on the right, that was a significantly sized.
much larger. Yes.
And this is where the young girls sat, because last week I asked Pat whether there were any female boarders.
Rooms to women. She felt men were much easier to control.
Hmm.
And but there was a time when she rented the first bedroom, the largest one, to 2 college students. They were best friends and they were waiting on a dormitory
Mhm,
room to come available.
mhm.
And so they lived here for a few months. Being 13, 14 years old, I thought they were the coolest ladies in the world.
I bet you
And
did.
they were very sweet to me.
Yeah.
But she was always nervous
Hmm.
during that time when she had them, because she knew how men and women interact.
Mhm.
And Rodeo Doe did not go in this house.
Yeah, fair enough. Another question about the rooming house. Sorry, you didn't. Sorry, I beg your pardon. You didn't finish off in terms of the configuration. So there
Okay.
were seven rooms.
7 bedrooms. and
Yeah,
she
5
rented out
let.
5. Yeah.
One bathroom here, and then
Uh-huh.
there are other areas of the
Right.
house. Yeah.
This house is unique to Texas in that we have a full basement.
And that's because of the high water table or the flooding.
Well, the bedrock is so hard
Yes.
that they have to blast.
Right. Oh.
But for this particular house, the lay of the land was actually sloped. So when you come and put a flat house on it,
Mhm.
you've got all that
That
space.
void. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So instead of filling it up with dirt,
Mhm.
they just turned it into a basement. So there's 5 bedrooms and a bath. Downstairs.
Yeah.
So that gave her 10 bedrooms that she could rent
In the
out.
main house. In the main
Yeah.
house.
Uh-huh.
And then there was the
And then-
annex at the back, wasn't
Exactly. And then in 52, my grandmother decided that the backyard was just a waste of space.
there? Mhm.
So she built a 2-story back house
Mm.
with a garage and a washroom on either end.
Mhm.
So there's a total of 8 bedrooms and 2 baths in the back house.
Yes. Yeah.
4 upstairs and 4 down.
Excuse me.
And so everybody shared a
Mm.
bathroom.
Mm.
And I have to admit, I find that back in those days, people were a lot more considerate
Mm.
and cleaner
Mm. Mm.
than they are today.
Mm.
Today, people will not share a bathroom. They don't want to do that.
Of course. Yeah.
But that's what you had to
They
do.
just got on with it and just.
Yeah. But they were
Because-
considerate of each other. They, we never had problems with them saying somebody took this or somebody took that.
Mm.
In my mother's final years, when I moved back to take care of her, we still had roomers here.
Mm. Mm.
And I was always having to mitigate
Mm.
an argument between men that were having to share a bathroom because somebody took or used some of that stuff.
Mm.
And it was like, you keep your things in your room, take it to the bathroom,
Mm.
use it, and then take it back.
Yes.
What is so difficult about that?
Mm.
So I prefer the older days
So,
of consideration.
Erlene Roberts, obviously, she was the housekeeper, but
Yes.
you said you had chores. Did you clean the bathrooms as well? Was
Oh,
that,
yeah.
you had to do that stuff? didn't
Oh,
you?
yeah. By the time I was 9 years old, I could make a bed really fast.
Okay, well, that's good. One thing I wanted to ask you was were the guests able to lock their rooms? Were they provided
in the
with?
basement,
keys?
basement and in the back house.
Okay.
They had a key to their own entrance level
Yes.
and a key to
To
their
their
own room,
Room. Right.
but not here in the main house.
Right.
The guest had no keys at all.
So there were 13 guests below and out back.
Right, and they
that
had
their own
keys.
access, their own keys, arguably more privacy, you could say.
Yeah.
Whereas the 5 rooms that were let out in the main house,
Uh-huh.
first floor, they didn't have.
No, the rooms were not, the doors were not equipped with locks.
Okay.
And so,
So
That's-
the
that was
the Oswald room behind you, was that a concertina kind of
French doors,
French doors?
French doors.
So they opened in, they opened
They
out.
opened out.
They opened out.
Mhm.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And, but someone was here 24/7,
Yes.
either one of my grandparents or Erling.
Mm.
So there was never a problem with worrying about somebody
Security,
going in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I read the
Yeah.
Warren Commission testimonies of your grandparents, and I can't remember which one, but one of them said that you know, each guest's belongings were sacred, and you know, they weren't.
Yeah,
You didn't go through them. You know,
Oh,
there were the
yeah.
house rules, what you could do, no smoking, no drinking. You know,
right.
but once you know, their belongings within their own curtilage was sacred.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, even we learned as children, if we even touched anything that was in somebody's room.
Mm.
Uh,
Lee had refrigerator privileges.
Yes, he
where you were
did.
telling me he kept his lunch and meat and milk in there.
uh-huh.
Did other guests equally have?
No,
If you lived in the main house here, did the other guests equally have privileges?
no.
So why was he special?
You know, other than the fact that she liked him,
Mm-hmm.
we knew he had a young family
Mhm.
and that they were separated and they were working at getting the family back together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother was very strong on family.
Yes.
And I think it might have just simply been her way of saying, save your money, eat cheap, and get that family back
Mhm.
together.
Okay. So he paid $8 a week for that
Yes.
room. Do you know was there a much higher value that he could have paid for
Another
a
room?
bigger room,
Oh, yeah.
upgrade room? What was the
Uh-huh.
maximum that it would have been?
The
let out?
largest room went for about $14 a week.
Okay, right. Because he was offered an upgrade at one point, wasn't
He
he?
sure was.
But-
2 or 3 days after he moved in,
Yeah.
another room came available.
Right.
And my grandmother had a personal policy that whoever lived in the smallest room got to look at the new room first.
Right. Okay.
She showed it to him, and
Yes.
according to her, he looked at it and said, Miss Johnson, I really don't have that much stuff. And I like the big windows in my room. I'm staying right where I'm at.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm
What-
wondering real quick,
Sorry,
Neale,
you carry
I just wrote the question that or a point that you'd raised about the housekeeping here and maybe how it may or may not have been separate with what was going on in the separate home that's in the back. Did Erlene Roberts or whomever was the housekeeper here also do those same duties for that house in the rear?
Oh,
as well?
yes.
Okay,
Oh, yes.
okay.
Because if you lived in the main house, you needed to have a 9 to 5 type job because you had a curfew of 11 o'clock.
So you were sharing the house with your grandparents and Erlene, whereas the other guests could come and go
Yeah.
more flexibly.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you lived in the basement or the back house, you could work whatever shift
Mm.
you needed.
Mhm.
And so we had to learn what their schedule was
Yes. And
because
that's where
you
you put
can't,
them. Yes.
because we can't
Yeah.
go in and clean the rooms when they're trying to sleep.
No, of course. And if you've got an overnight warehouseman kind of job,
Right,
you don't want them here. You've got to be at the back or in the basement.
right.
Yeah.
So we would learn their schedule. And so, yeah, if they were, working in the evening or late at night, then that's when their room was cleaned
Mm.
and the linens were changed once a week.
Right.
Fresh towels and washcloths once a
That
week.
makes sense, doesn't it? What about the laundry facilities? I mean, I know that there was a laundrette across the road down the
Right,
block,
yeah.
but were any of the guests allowed to use the washing machine or dryer?
Well, they could pay extra
Oh, okay.
for Erling to do their laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause
And that was, and as far as I remember, I believe my grandmother allowed her to keep that money.
right. Okay. As a supplement. Really. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you make of Lee signing in as OH Lee? What's your opinion on that? Why do you think he did that?
Honestly, I don't know. Because there was really no reason.
Mhm.
But we do know he had other aliases. Alex Heidel, O.H. Lee, I'm not sure
Hmm.
what others.
And was that room ever designated as room 0?
No,
'Cause
actually,
there's-
it's
there's-
room number 3,
Right, okay.
because on the first bedroom,
Mhm.
the number 1 is still on it.
Oh, okay.
The bedroom that I use as my bedroom, which is just
Just
right
around on the
behind
right,
this wall,
Yeah.
is number 2.
Oh, okay.
And then his was number 3.
Hmm.
And then there are 2 bedrooms behind the kitchen.
Yes, so then by the
And so
bathroom.
that's 4 and 5.
5.
Was there ever any room here that was ever designated as the number 0?
No,
So, because this was originally a small library, wasn't it? And then,
well, actually, it was considered a side porch when my
Mhm.
grandmother first
yes,
bought the house.
Yeah.
And according to my mother, it was her favorite room
mhm,
because she had all of her plants in there. My grandmother
Yeah.
had the greenest thumb you could imagine.
mhm,
And so she loved her plants.
mhm.
But she bought this house as a widow. So she, my mother and uncle moved in.
Mm.
Later, she met the
Arthur, Arthur.
the gentleman that I would know as grandfather.
Mm, mm.
And his father was still alive, needed 24-hour care.
Mm.
And my grandmother, being who she was, she just said, move him in.
Yeah.
The plants left and the room became a bedroom.
So there's absolutely no truth in this idea of it being room 0
Mm-mm.
rented out to Herbert Lee.
Uh-uh.
Okay.
We have a few questions here in the chat that are quite topical, if you don't mind for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. On the topic of Earlene Roberts and maybe the extra fee that it would take for somebody to have her do their laundry, do you happen to know if Lee ever asked her to do his laundry while he was here?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There was the laundromat directly across the street. But then he went to Irving every weekend.
Mm.
So I would imagine Marina would do his laundry when he was out in Irving.
Sure.
I think there are reports that he did actually use this washateria opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
So can we
There are a few others, but we'll
Okay.
field those at the end. They're not quite topical on that particular
Okay.
subject.
so how about we talk about the assassination
Okay.
day? What do you remember about that day? That's obviously significant.
Well, my brothers and I were at school. And I remember the mood of the school was very jubilant, very excited. People were, thrilled that the president was coming to Dallas. The school didn't have enough televisions to go into every school class. And so they positioned them in the hallways so that teachers could either let the children come out, sit on the floor and watch for a little while, or they could come out, watch, and then go back into the class and tell us what was going on.
Right.
And my desk happened to be angled where I could see directly out into the hallway.
Mhm.
And teachers would gather together and, smiling and talking to each other. And suddenly I knew something horrible had happened because the mood of the school just plummeted.
Amongst all the adult teachers, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I suddenly saw teachers huddling, hugging each other, wiping their faces,
Mm.
come back into the classroom just for a quick second to make sure we were under control, and then go back out and get huddled again. That went on for a while because, as we now know, the president was shot at 12:30, and he was not pronounced until 1.
Mm.
And so they just gave us busy work. They wouldn't tell us that the president had been shot. And finally, they came on the air
Mm.
and said that we had lost the president.
Did they dismiss school at that time?
They didn't make that announcement at that time.
Oh,
Not at that time. It was just a few minutes later that they came on and made that announcement. Strangely enough, my mother's photography studio,
It's directly opposite the theatre, isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
mm,
it's on Jefferson, and it was across the street from the Texas Theater. And my mother saw Mr. Lee actually being arrested.
Mm.
She recognized him as a roomer here and the gentleman that played with her children.
Mm.
She didn't know why he was being
That
arrested.
must have spooked her though.
It did, because she was very much upset about Kennedy.
Mm.
But now that her mother had a rumor being arrested, the day obviously was not getting any better,
No.
and so just shut down.
Mm.
She shows up at the school just moments after the principal has told us that we've lost the president.
Yeah. So I imagine there was a whole bunch of parents showing up at the school.
Not as quickly as my
No,
mother.
She had the inside track, of course. but
Yes,
I guess.
we were
yeah.
the first 3 out.
Could you have walked from the school home? Where was your
Oh,
school?
yes, the school was only 6-7 blocks from our home,
Okay.
so we could have walked it easily.
Right.
And we did a lot.
Mm.
But she picked us up, took us home,
Mm.
went around the house and unplugged all the TVs.
To try and protect you?
I had to be.
Yeah.
And she told us that the TVs were broke. Well, now let's get down to the important facts of life. An 11, 10, and 6-year-old. We know cartoons are supposed to come on soon after school is over. And we look at her and we go, Mama, we saw you unplug the TVs.
Yeah.
And she got on her forklift. That's what we used to call it, which meant that the back straightened,
Yes.
the shoulders came back. I said they're broke. We looked at each other and went, okay, Mama's gone nuts. Let's go outside. And so she did not allow us to watch any TV whatsoever
Mm.
until Sunday morning.
wow.
By Sunday morning, you could actually watch television. We're sitting there having a late breakfast, watching something. I don't know, remember what it was, but they break in with the transfer of Lee from city to county jail.
Mm.
Detective Lavelle brings Lee out. Jack Ruby steps forward and shoots him.
Mm.
My brothers recognized Mr. Lee immediately.
Yes.
They go hysterical. They're screaming. They're crying. That's Mr. Lee. That's Mr. Lee. Why did they shoot Mr. Lee?
Mm.
Mother jumps up, turns off the TV again. It's
Yeah.
broke. And has to sit down with the 3 of us and explain to us what he's been accused of,
Mm.
what's been going on over here at my grandmother's house with the police and the
'Cause
FBI.
you weren't here over the weekend, were you?
No, she kept
Deliberately.
us away.
Yeah.
And why we just saw our friend shot on TV.
That must have been incredibly traumatic for you, particularly your brothers. I would have thought.
Particularly my brothers,
yeah.
yes. You know, when you basically grow up in a rooming house,
Mm.
you're used to the transits. People come in and out of your life constantly.
Yes, yeah.
And so when we were finally allowed to come back, which was after the investigation was over, we didn't come back to the house, this house, for about 2 months.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, with all the comings and goings of law enforcement and
mhm.
press, I guess.
Yeah, and my mother did not, and she didn't want to take a chance on a reporter taking pictures of us either coming or going.
No, she's been very protective, yeah.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
was.
Were there still any other people that were tenants of the rooming house during that period of the investigation when you didn't come to the house for that 2-month period? Were there still people that
The
were?
police, they were not allowed to leave.
Okay.
They had to stay here.
Okay.
So once the investigation was over, there was a large exodus
Ah,
because they were,
They were forced to stay, yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely,
yeah, they were, and so, but anyone that did stay, like Mr. Van, my grandmother, when she rented out Lee's room, and she rented it out just as quickly as she could,
Yeah,
she told Van and anyone else that was still here,
Hmm.
just to keep their mouths shut. No one had a right to know who lived here.
Hmm.
And needless to say, somebody was going to tell the newbie
of course, yeah.
who, and they reacted a little differently.
Hmm.
Some would get up, go grab their things and walk out the door.
Hmm.
Others would give their notice,
Hmm.
and others would stay.
Do you think you had any guests who, by design, rented out this room because they wanted to experience this
If
thing? They were
if
curious.
they made that intention known,
Yeah, they were not
No.
allowed in, presumably.
if
Yeah,
they kept their mouth shut,
yeah, you don't
they
know.
probably did.
Both your grandparents in their Warren Commission testimonies said that and there is a bit of a disconnect, that the FBI or
Mhm.
the police were here by 2 o'clock. Why do you think they got here so quickly? Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, it was my understanding they didn't get here until after 5. But I could be wrong.
No, their testimonies say that they got here by 2.
Okay.
But the disconnect is whether it's FBI or whether it's police.
Well, and it was probably both,
Yeah, probably.
because I know back in the 60s, if you had any kind of an office type job, detective, FBI, whatever, or an office job, you wore a uniform.
Hmm. Hmm.
Slacks, shirt, tie, jacket,
Hat.
hat, yes, a fedora,
Yes.
most likely.
Yes.
So my grandmother didn't distinguish between a police detective and an FBI.
Yeah. Of course.
So she ended up just saying the investigators.
Mhm. Do you have an opinion on the fact that Oswald was allegedly the Beckley address was allegedly found on him in person when he was arrested? Have you heard that story?
I'm not sure that I've heard that now. It was my understanding that they got this address from his employment card at the book depository.
Except for the fact that had Irving as the address.
But at the same time, my understanding is that when Lee is arrested, they asked him what his address was, and he gave them this address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of grey on this.
Mhm.
What was it like, X period after the assassination? Were neighbours sympathetic to your circumstances, or were they nasty to you because you'd been here?
No, as far as I know,
Mhm.
people were very understanding, and the family did not receive a lot of blowback.
Mhm.
Now, I know as children,
Yes,
we received no blowback
that's surprising.
because we went to school here.
Mm.
Our grandmother, the Johnson house,
Yes,
was here,
yes,
but our family home was over here,
yes,
and that was the Puckett home.
yeah. So people
The
didn't connect
people
it.
at the school did not know the connection between the Johnson and the Puckett
Mm.
families.
Did your mother speak to the principal at all about, making sure
She-
that you weren't
She probably
bullied
did.
or?
Yeah,
picked
she
upon?
probably did, but I'm not aware of it.
Mhm.
My mother was one of those that she'll do the protecting, but she's not going to brag about it. She's not going to talk about it.
What do you make of Erlene Roberts just disappearing? Just getting up in the middle of the night and just going. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mhm. Well, she was just a strange little bird.
Yeah.
Later, we discovered that she had a sister that owned
Bertha Creek. Yeah.
that owned a boarding house.
Mm.
A boarding house would offer meals. Well, her sister would call her in the middle of the night and say, "I've got to have help. My cook left me." And so Erlene would pack up her things and leave.
Mm.
My mother would get up at 4 a.m.
And she'd be gone.
and she'd be gone.
Mm. Yeah.
But Erlene and her sister did not get along, so they'd have an argument,
And she'd
and
come
she'd
back.
come back and beg for her job back.
And of course, your grandmother's relationship was a little bit fractious, wasn't it, between
Erlene,
Erlene and Gladys?
well, I think my grandmother mostly kind of felt sorry for Erlene.
Right.
She was partly blind in one eye.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't in the greatest health,
Mm.
but my grandmother needed someone to be here
During the day. Yeah.
all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Darlene was willing to do the job. Well,
Mm.
that worked out just fine.
Yeah. In her Warren Commission testimony, she says how much Erlene embellished stories.
Oh, yeah, yeah. My Erlene was not, she could, if there was a room for rent, Erlene could show the room, but she could not rent the room.
Mm.
They had to come back
Always go through your
and go
grandparents.
to my grand. Erlene did do, she would rent every once in a while. She'd forget herself
Mhm.
and rent. And I've heard my grandmother snap her back into position
Yeah.
quite often.
Really.
Yeah, because she wasn't allowed to take in rent
Almost. Yeah.
or anything like that.
Right.
And so but if somebody came to pay their rent and didn't want to either come back when my grandmother was here
Mm.
or felt like they just didn't have the time, they'd leave the money here with Erlene,
Mhm.
which I understand,
Mhm.
but that was not the policy.
That was just extenuating circumstances. Yeah.
But my grandmother would snap her back
Mm.
and, you're not allowed to take in money,
Mm. Interesting.
because my grandmother, if someone owed rent, either here or one of her other rental properties,
Mm.
if they were behind in their rent and they were paying a little extra
Yeah.
to catch up,
Yes.
my grandmother did not totally believe that there was not that possibility that Erlene could take the extra
Yeah.
that was there
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
She didn't quite trust her.
no, she didn't.
What was your relationship like with Ellie?
We really didn't have a relationship.
Mhm.
There were just some people that kids automatically, they know that the adult doesn't like children.
Yeah.
Now, Erling was never rude.
Mm.
She was never tacky to us or
Mhm.
anything like that. It was just one of those things. I'll be so glad when these kids get out of here. You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
she
was never rude or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Before we move off this topic, one of the requests that came in from somebody that's attending in the Zoom was just asking, but besides anything that you've already mentioned or the comment that you'd made to kind of start where you just said she's kind of a strange little bird, do you have any other opinions or just overall recollections or anything else that you might want to share about Erlene Roberts before we move off of her specifically?
No, because I really don't have, like I said, we didn't have a relationship.
Okay.
She wasn't going to sit down and talk to us. She was not going to ask us about how was our day or anything like that.
So, what do you think happened to the register, the infamous register that went missing? Because obviously that's caused a lot of concern amongst the research community.
Yes. All I can say about that is that most likely it was destroyed by my grandmother.
Mhm.
According to my mother and my older cousin, that first 24, 36 hours, my grandmother was absolutely horrified and she believed everything they were telling her
Yeah.
about Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of people would have believed everything
Yeah.
that was coming out.
And so she just didn't want any memory
Mm.
of him being in her home.
Mhm.
And so I do believe she,
Just destroyed it.
yeah, she ripped them out and
Mm.
all that. Because I did find more journals of hers. And going through them, I found a lot of pages that were ripped out.
Really.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's funny, anything that would have said that she owed money to a business or whatever, all of that is gone. It's
Mm.
all ripped out. But anything that said people owed her money is all still there.
Right. See, I was hoping, Pat, that you were going to say, well, actually, it's in the register.
Yeah.
Register's in the sideboard here. And would you like to pour over it?
Yeah, I would too.
So the other thing, when looking at Gladys's Warren Commission testimony, there's this thing where she says to whichever counsellor is interviewing her that she wanted the O.H. Lee receipt back because it's
Mhm.
valued at $30. I looked that up in today's money. That's $285. I mean, it's not meaningless, but it's not life changing.
Uh-huh.
What do you think of? What do you make of all of that? That seems. I mean, when you look at the apartments they had and the carpentry business, the cafe.
She was very frugal.
Yeah.
My grandmother was a remarkable woman all on her own without Mr. Lee's
Mm-hmm.
incident. She had less than a 5th grade education.
Mm-hmm.
She was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
My biological grandfather
Yeah.
made a living for the family owning several diners,
Mm-hmm.
but he became bedridden,
Mm-hmm.
disabled. And so he taught her how to run his diners from his sick bed.
Mm-hmm.
That's when she discovered that she had a head for business.
Yes. Yeah.
And, but she was always terrified not to have enough food in the house.
Mm.
She, lived through the depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
My biological grandfather was known that he never turned away anyone hungry from his diners.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
He always fed. And after he passed on, that's when she bought this house.
Mm. Mm.
And I don't think she ever really bought the house to make it into a rooming house.
Right.
But several months after they moved into this house, my mother's best friend from the old neighborhood became an orphan. No one wanted her to go to the orphanage. So my grandmother took in Aunt Josephine. Well, in those days, anything to do with children's rights, safety, whatever, those offices were located on the orphanage property. So my grandmother had this new relationship with the orphanage.
Mm.
She found out about aged out orphans. At age 18, they were given their things, put on the street, and said, God bless you, we'll pray for you.
Mm. Mm.
Unfortunately, it's still the same way
Mm.
in the foster care program,
Mm.
even today.
Yes.
Well, she hated that. So she told the administrator, you send the boys to me. Orphans would show up. She would give them a room to sleep in,
Mm.
help them find a job,
Mm.
and then she would teach them how to handle their money.
Really. So there was a very kind side to her.
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
Yeah.
She was tough,
Yeah.
but every payday,
Mm.
they had to show her their checking account and their savings book.
Mm.
And if they had not saved as much money as she thought they needed to save, they got a lecture.
It's interesting.
And it didn't take long for them to save enough money so that when they left this house and were ready to move out on their own, they had the money
Mm.
to do it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
Stepping stone for them.
yeah. And so life gets busy. Administrators change. The boys stopped showing up, but everyone was used to people being here. They
Mm.
liked it.
Mm.
And that's when she said, you know what, let's
Mm.
just rent them out.
Did she ever consider making it into a full boarding house with providing food?
No, she had a diner that
Mm.
she worked in downtown Dallas.
Mm.
Her morning started at 4 a.m. in the morning
Wow.
because it was open. The diner was open for breakfast and lunch.
Before people
only.
went to work, yeah. Mm.
And so for her to be on her feet
Mm.
during that and then come back
And
here
provide
and
supper, yeah, forget
yeah.
it, yeah.
No,
It's just too much.
it was.
One thing I forgot to ask you when we were talking about Oswald was the do you recall the frequency of phone calls into the rooming house and whether he was speaking in Spanish or Russian?
That's one of the questions that came.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't get very many phone calls coming in.
Mm.
I do recall that there was one call. My grandmother called Mr. Lee to the phone, and my mother was here. And she looked at my mother and she said, "They're talking some strange language." And she said, "Listen on the extension." And so my mother listened just for a second, and she just looked at my grandma and she says, "It's just Spanish." And that was that. But we heard Mr. Lee speaking Russian to Marina on a nightly basis.
Yeah, I mean that kind of figures. I think the Spanish language is interesting. If there's any pro or anti-Castro connections.
Well, and there are lots of information saying that he was, involved in pro and anti,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
Cuban shenanigans and all of that. But yet, to me, that sounds just perfectly normal because I truly, truly believe that Mr. Lee was a CIA operative, not an agent, an operative.
mm,
Um, and I believe his cover story was to be this communist sympathizer.
yeah.
And that's why he was taught Russian
Mm,
while he was in the Marines.
mm,
He was groomed.
mm.
He was groomed for all of this.
Yeah.
And when it came to the assassination, they were planning it. The lead team probably went to Dealey Plaza and saying, well, we can put a man here, we can put one here and here. It'd be nice to have somebody in that book depository.
Mm.
And, let's see who's working there that we can use.
Mm.
And suddenly they realized they actually had an operative already working in the book depository.
Yeah.
And they
If
just
he
went,
wasn't
how
placed, yeah.
perfect is this?
Mm.
Well, I guess we don't have to tease that out of Pat now. So
Well, I think one thing that you told me last week, which was interesting, because of your views, you
Mhm.
couldn't actually link with Gary Mack at the sixth floor museum, because you were hoping to have some kind of a
Mhm.
commercial relationship where
I would love that.
visitors could have gone to the sixth floor, and then there was an option to tour 1026 Beckley, but
Mhm.
they weren't interested, were they?
No, the curator, Gary Mack, was very interested.
Yeah.
But the director,
Put the
was not.
kibosh on it. Yeah.
oh yeah, she said absolutely not,
Mm.
because I will not stand behind the Warren Commission.
Mm.
I think the Warren Commission is a bunch of lies.
Mm.
Um,
Well, we'll have
They
to ask.
got
We'll have
their-
to ask you to join Dealey Plaza UK then, because I don't think there's anybody amongst our
Yeah.
society that.
They got their
believes that.
marching orders from Lyndon Johnson and Alan Dulles, after being fired from the CIA by Kennedy, was
Yeah.
on the Warren Commission. And I know he was there to guide the investigation.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So I've got to ask you this. There are some JFK researchers that don't believe Oswald lived here at all. What do you make of that?
Everyone is entitled to their opinions. If they can prove otherwise, let them
Mm.
step forward and actually show it,
Yeah.
instead of just using their mouths.
Okay, I think we know where you stand on that one. And how about this one? What about the idea that this was a safe house of some sort? Because obviously you must have heard those stories that
Oh.
researchers think that there were,
How ridiculous.
Cubans in the backyard and
Yeah.
so forth. What
This
what
was
do you
a
make of that?
White House.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, I think I've come to the end of the sort of my line of
Uh-huh.
questioning, and thank you very much. Are there any more in the audience?
there are a few, just to elaborate a little bit on the phone calls, because I think that was definitely one that came in, that at least that you're aware of. I know you
Mhm.
mentioned one in particular that was monitored or listened into where they were clearly speaking Spanish and you were told that. And I think you did mention that you heard, or maybe it was perhaps your grandmother had heard at some occasion, maybe many occasions, him talking in Russian to Marina.
Oh, yeah.
In phone calls. Any other phone calls that you can
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, gotcha. All right, couple other questions here. This is more specific to the rooming house in
Uh-huh.
general, or I'm sorry, the room where Lee stayed in general. Would Lee be able to fix curtain rods on any of his windows? I'm sure you're aware of the curtain rod story.
No.
And what is the width in inches of those windows, if you know it?
Well, I don't know the inches and all of that kind of stuff. I'm not good with numbers, but no, he did not need curtain rods.
Okay.
There is a fairly famous picture of my grandmother standing by the bed on the night of the assassination. You can very clearly see there are drapes on the windows. They were there.
Let's see. I think most of the rest of these were, oh, I'm sorry, one from Richard. Yes. Did Gladys Johnson know Mary Bledsoe at all? Is a question.
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of that. But from my understanding, Mr. Lee stayed with Miss Bledsoe for less than a week. She heard him speaking Russian, probably talking to Marina.
Mm-hmm.
Panicked, said, "You can't live here any longer. You got to go in the morning. You got to go." And he comes back by here. And that morning, my grandmother had put out a room for rent sign.
Okay.
You have met Ruth Payne, haven't you?
Yes,
What do you make of Ruth?
I think she's a very elegant, sweet, kind of normal person that, I think the so-called rumors of her being attached to the CIA is bunk.
Okay.
She was a stay-at-home mom, 2 children. Since when,
It'd be good cover though, wouldn't
if you can manage that,
it?
just because her husband worked for Bell Helicopter,
Mhm.
yeah, Bell Helicopters always had connections to the government
Mhm.
and intelligence and all of that. But that doesn't mean he is attached or she is attached. I think she simply, when she and Marina met, I think her heart went out to Marina, because you have to remember, Ruth is Quaker. And back in the in the 60s, the Quaker community was trying to bridge this divide of the Cold War between Russia and the United States with exchange students.
Mhm.
She was involved in that. She also volunteered at a Russian senior community center. Well, most of those Russians had been brought here by their children. They could barely speak English.
Mhm.
And that encouraged Ruth to go back to school to learn a little bit of Russian
Mhm.
so that she could communicate with these seniors.
Mhm.
It was after she had learned a little Russian and was doing this community work when her husband gets transferred to Dallas from Bell Helicopter.
Questions come in, basically just asking you to elaborate on how you met Ruth. Or if,
Oh, she was here talking during one of the there's another bottle in there.
Is there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I go and get it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right around the side.
Can I get the luncheon meat from the refrigerator?
But she was speaking in front of a group about the assassination, and then I went to hear her speak.
and where was that? Do you remember?
It was in Irving.
It was in Irving. Okay.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
I believe it was at the library,
Okay.
and it might have been on one of the occasions to help promote the Ruth Payne
House.
Museum.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is relatively recently then. We're
Yes.
talking within the last 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
Okay. You hadn't
Yes.
met her prior to that.
No.
Okay.
No. And I asked her if she had fond memories of Mr. Lee, because I knew that she had stated that she believed he was the lone shooter.
Mhm.
And she said that she most definitely had fond memories of Mr. Lee.
Mm.
I think that is interesting because if you have fond memories of him, how could you possibly believe that he was also the lone gunman?
Sure.
Well, you could ask
It's
that. You could ask that across the spectrum of
Yeah.
a lot of people, that
Yeah,
irrespective of whether they've met him or have memories of him.
yeah. But if, to me, either you know the core of the person or you don't.
Yeah, fair point. So, Judy Baker, 'cause you know, this is always controversial. You know Judy.
Yes.
How did that relationship develop? When did you?
Sorry, we've lost sound.
And so she came and we sat on the couch and we talked about Mr. Lee. A couple of years later,
There's a message that the sound is okay. Sound is back. Okay, right.
a couple of years later, she invited me to speak at her conference.
Okay, yeah.
And then, but she's been to the house twice and we've sat and we've talked. And then that's when she presented me with her book, and I have a few copies here.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's great. Are there any other questions from the floor?
There are none right now. I just put a thing in the chat saying any other questions. We can ask Pat to open it up for some live Q&A from anybody.
Yeah.
Perhaps ask them to raise their hand here on the Zoom. I would give it maybe a minute or two just to see if anybody wants to do that, to have a chance to speak with you directly and ask their own question without the means of my interpretation.
Or misinterpretation?
I hope I'm not misinterpreting. I was just wondering if, while we're waiting on that to happen, if maybe you could ask you to elaborate, if you can at all, any further on any other recollections or memories of other tenants that were here during the time of when Oswald was here, besides the one that you
yeah.
did.
Not really,
Okay.
because you have to remember, I have a grandmother that's a very controlling one.
Mhm.
And I was the only girl. Therefore, I was not allowed to go outside and play with my brothers. And if my grandmother was outside, I could go outside. Other than that, I was controlled. And so I didn't have interactions with the other tenants, not on a regular basis. Now, if there was a holiday, they were invited to eat dinner with the family.
Okay.
And where did Lee help you with his with your homework?
Right here.
At this table we're sitting at now.
Mhm.
But this was all done very discreetly.
Oh, yeah, because we would have to be looking to see if grandma's coming out of the kitchen.
Right.
Nancy has a question. Nancy, if you would, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hello, Pat. It's such a pleasure to have you here today with us. And thank you so much for your reminiscences. It's nothing like hearing it from the person themselves. My question is about if you know anything about hearing about Erlene and your grandma talking about a police car coming by the house and tooting its horn that afternoon.
Yes,
What can you share with us?
you bet. I do not doubt that Erlene saw a police officer car, that she heard him beep. What I doubt is the possible significance. If I hear it once, I hear it almost 50 times a day. The light, the red light turns red. a car stops. The light turns green. Another car coming down from the hill comes up. The first car has not moved and they beep. It could have been something just that simple.
In fact, Nancy, since we've been here, it's happened probably a couple of occasions in this last hour and a half.
Mhm. And so, but could it have more significance? Well, yeah, it could. I'm just, not sure. I do know that story was just about the first thing that conspiracy theorists jumped on and said, oh, the Dallas police was involved in this. I just don't know if I agree with the significance.
So if it was a rather common occurrence, I wonder why it would have been mentioned, and if you possibly heard any discussion about it.
Well, Erling did not remember the police car and the honk for 2 or 3 days after the assassination. The police, the investigators kept coming back to the house, talking to everybody, and they would use those open-ended questions. Is there anything that you've thought of since we were here last talking? Is there anything that you remember or anything? And in that kind of a circumstance, you are racking your brain for any information because you want to help the police. You want to help. And so it could have been something just that simple.
Do you think she might have wanted to have inserted herself into this story more
considering she-
prominently,
Yeah, considering she inserted herself as a much more grand lady than she was on a life everyday basis. Yeah, that could be part of it too.
Did you ever see any police officers around your home, your grandma's home before the assassination? I mean, was that a common thing to see policemen patrolling the neighborhood, either walking or driving by?
Well, yeah, I mean, the police, there were patrol routes, and we were very much used to, certain police were assigned certain patrol routes, and then, the neighborhood would get to know these officers fairly well. So that was pretty typical.
So Erlene, she had a problem with her right eye, didn't she?
I believe it was her right.
Was it noticeable in terms of her ability to conduct any chores?
I never saw that it gave her that much of a difficulty.
Right, because that's always the issue that people level against her, that maybe she didn't see what she really saw. Or...
No, I don't think she, it kept her from actually seeing what she saw.
No, I mean it's not that far away.
No,
either.
it's
If you-
not.
I mean, if we look
And
out, it's
even if
really
she only
close.
had one good eye, you can tell the difference between a regular car and a police car.
I mean, you can even make it out looking through these drapes. As they
And
come
I've
up,
got
you can
them
figure,
fairly
yeah,
thick.
right.
Are there any more questions from the floor?
We've got a couple of new messages that have come in here.
Okay.
So just this is more of a comment and then a question from Joseph. The car came up and honked while Lee Harvey Oswald was in the house, and that's why it's important or very odd. Didn't Erlene Roberts have vision problems, which I think you just asked, and wasn't she legally blind? Maybe you do or don't
Well,
know the answer to
it's
that
my
question.
understanding she was partially blind in one eye. I don't know if that went to the legalization part.
Okay.
Well, perhaps we should wrap up.
I
since
think we should wrap up because we've got a party that's just arrived. The only thing is, could we just video, just before we stop the recording, could we just video this section?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's fine.
Ryan, oh, hang on, is there another, is there another question from Nancy?
Yeah, what percentage of rooms were rented in November of 63?
All 18.
All 18. Awesome. Yeah, but yeah, if it's before we wrap up, maybe just 5 minutes to perhaps at least in the
Yeah.
Harvey Oswald
Yeah.
room, and then if that's okay, then we can.
Yeah, perhaps if you show the jacket and the.
Sure. Pat, would you mind giving a little bit of a brief on that?
And
quickly?
you've still
Okay.
got the revolver, haven't
Yeah, right.
So Neale,
I wish I had one.
if you want to mute yours, I'll unmute this here.
you? Okay, we'll do.
Okay.
This is his little room. There were French doors here, so he definitely had his privacy. This is,
Why is it?
You just-
I've muted.
Okay, turn your audio all the way down. Okay. So just so everybody can get a look at where the opening is with the French doors and the hinges that are still there. Of course, the French doors are no longer, but thank you, Pat.
this is the bed that he actually slept on.
Do the
And my little joke
Do the
is,
width of
it's
it.
not the 50-year-old mattress. That's too creepy.
I do that.
Oh, yes,
So
absolutely.
this is how wide it is. Remarkable, really.
And this is the wardrobe closet that he actually used. And this is what an Eisenhower jacket looks like. Naturally, this is a duplicate of the one he came here and put on. And if you don't know why it's called an Eisenhower jacket, it's because President Eisenhower loved windbreakers. Even in pictures of him in Europe when he was over the armed forces, he always wore a windbreaker over his uniform. People thought it was his own, that it was part of his uniform, but it wasn't. Yeah. And this is a list of everything that the police and FBI took out of this room that was his personal items. It does list a brown leather holster on a .38. But what's not on the list is any mention of ammunition.
Mhm.
I pointed out because the revolver holds 6 bullets. Officer Tippett is shot 4 times.
Mhm.
Yet when Mr. Lee is arrested at the Texas Theater, when he's arrested, the chamber is full. So where did the extra 4 bullets come from?
Great question.
And
Awesome.
this is the picture I referred to earlier that of my grandmother on the night of the assassination. And as you can see, there are drapes that are on the window.
Sorry, guys. I know the lighting's kind of tough in here. I don't know how
I
That's
can move this.
not come. Yeah, would you mind being able to pull that out for a second, maybe, so that we could see that?
1 second here, hon.
Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Yes, much better. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Pat, and thank you to everybody else that was joining us on the Zoom. Apologize, we're having to cut it a little abruptly, but as Neale mentioned, we've got some guests that have come in. So Neale, if you'd like to say anything in closing.
Well, no, I think just we're so grateful that you were able to do this for us. So,
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much, Pat.
All of the participants. It's really,
You know,
really
and if
interesting.
your group gets, if y'all come up with other questions, if you want to talk about Tippett or anything else, I am more than willing to do this again.
Okay, well, that's great. We've got your email address and I'll make sure that everybody is aware of it.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Pat. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
y'all. Y'all have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Pat.
Neil.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye now.
Video, bye. Thank you.
Okay, you still got the session open there?
I'll end the meeting for all.
I was to say, do you stop the recording?
Oh, hang on.
Um,
Yeah,
Or I can
okay.
do it. I
Yeah,
can
you do
on
it.
here as
You do
well.
it. Oh, Pat,